Meet Alex and Dan. They are both 32. They live in the same town. They both earn $80,000 a year. And after years of smart spending choices, canceled memberships, and tricking themselves into thinking generic brand cereal tastes, just like the name brand, they've both managed to save $80,000. Financially, they are identical. Personality-wise, not even close. Alex likes stability in every area of his life. He likes having a clear plan and knowing what comes next. He wants a place that feels permanently his, a garage for tools he may or may not know how to handle, a backyard he can slowly become overly defensive of, and the freedom to customize the place completely. Dan is different. He values flexibility. He likes keeping his options open and knowing he can pivot whenever he feels like it. He doesn't know where he'll be 5 years from now, and honestly, he prefers it that way. The idea of committing to a single address for the next 30 years makes him a bit more anxious than it probably should. Eventually, those two very different personalities lead them to two very different financial choices. Alex buys a house, Dan keeps renting, and for the next 20 years, we're gonna follow them both. Every mortgage payment, every rent hike, every repair bill, and every single dollar Dan saves by renting and actually puts into the market. Then at the end, we'll see where two people who started with the exact same salary, the exact same savings, but chose two completely different paths actually ended up. Let's find out. Alex and Dan are currently renting in the same mid-sized American city. After months of searching, dozens of online listings, and more open houses than Alex would ever like to admit, he finally finds the one. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small backyard, and a garage large enough to store workout equipment he will never touch. He decides to buy it. The house costs $350,000. Alex puts $70,000 down, exactly 20%. That leaves him with a $280,000 mortgage. But the down payment isn't the only cash Alex needs to buy the home. There are closing costs, lender fees, title fees, inspections, prepaid taxes, and roughly 46 documents he's asked to sign while understanding almost none of them. Closing costs can easily run around 2% to 5% of the purchase price. So, on a $350,000 home, Alex could easily spend somewhere between $7,000 and $17,500 just to complete the purchase. For our comparison, let's assume Alex's closing costs come out to $10,000. So, before he has even unpacked a box, Alex has already put his entire $80,000 into buying the house, $70,000 for the down payment, and another $10,000 in closing fees. He takes out a 30-year fixed mortgage at 7%. His monthly principal and interest payment is about $1,863, but that's just the mortgage itself. Owning the house comes with a few other recurring monthly expenses, around $350 in property taxes, $150 in homeowners insurance, and Alex sets aside about $290 per month for maintenance, roughly 1% of the home's value every year. That brings his initial monthly housing cost to about $2,653. Meanwhile, Dan's math looks very different. He rents a comparable 3-bedroom house nearby for $2,000 a month. No property taxes, no homeowners insurance, and if the water heater suddenly decides to break down, that's his landlord's problem. That leaves Dan with an extra $653 every month. For a brief moment, that cash starts looking suspiciously like a trip to Thailand, but Dan resists the temptation. Instead, he decides to invest every single dollar he saves by renting. Dan puts the $80,000 he didn't use to buy a home into a broad stock market index fund. And from that point on, the $653 he saves each month goes straight into that same investment portfolio. At least initially, Dan's decision looks pretty solid. He lives in a similar house, pays less out of pocket each month, and has his money working for him in the stock market. Now, this is usually where someone says, yeah, but Dan is throwing $2,000 away on rent every month. Alex's mortgage payment is building equity, and technically that's true, but there's a small catch. Especially in the early years, Alex's mortgage builds equity painfully slowly. In his first month, Alex pays $1,633 in mortgage interest, $350 in property taxes, $150 in insurance, and $290 set aside for upkeep. So, out of Alex's total $2,653 monthly housing cost, only about $230 $230 actually goes toward building equity. The other $2,423 is simply the cost of owning the property. Meanwhile, Dan pays $2,000 in rent. Yes, that rent builds zero equity, but calling rent throwing money away while pretending mortgage interest, property taxes, insurance, and roof repairs are investments is creative accounting. Now, let's fast forward 3 years. Alex has made 36 mortgage payments, built up a little equity, and learned one of the core lessons of homeownership. When you own the place, every strange noise suddenly has financial consequences. One Saturday, the water heater stops working. Alex watches a YouTube video titled Easy Water Heater Fix. Anyone can do this. 4 hours later, he calls a professional who actually can. The repair costs him a few $100. Luckily, expenses like this are exactly why Alex has been budgeting for maintenance. After 3 years of mortgage payments, Alex's loan balance has dropped from $280,000 down to about $270,835. He has paid down just over $9,000 of principal. Now, let's assume his home has appreciated at between 3% and 4% per year. The house is now worth somewhere between roughly $382,000 and $394,000. That leaves Alex with approximately $112,000 to $123,000 in home equity. That is real wealth. Meanwhile, Dan has paid $72,000 in rent over those 3 years, but his original $80,000 has remained invested. At a 10% annual return, that initial investment alone has grown to roughly $106,000. Dan has also continued investing the monthly difference. Add those extra contributions and their growth, and his portfolio is now worth roughly $130,000. So after 3 years, the result is surprisingly close. Alex has built substantial home equity. Dan has built a substantial investment portfolio. Alex can paint the living room whatever color he wants. Dan can move next month, but as the years go by, the costs on both sides begin to shift. Alex's principal and interest payment remains locked in, but that doesn't mean the total cost of owning his home stays completely flat. As the value of the property increases, his property taxes rise along with it. Insurance gets more expensive, and as the house gets older, the repair bills start getting a bit more ambitious. Meanwhile, Dan has a growing expense of his own: rent. He starts out paying $2,000 a month, but every year his rent creeps a little higher. $2,000 becomes $2,060, then roughly $2,122, then a little more the year after that. Nothing about the home has changed except the amount leaving Dan's bank account every month. Apparently, his landlord is also a big believer in compound growth, and with rent increasing by around 3% a year, the $653 monthly advantage Dan started with slowly begins to disappear. And this is where time starts working in Alex's favor. The principal and interest portion of his mortgage stays fixed while Dan's rent keeps climbing. But Dan still has one major advantage we haven't fully accounted for. Dan's original $80,000 has been invested in the stock market this entire time. And that brings us to one of the biggest factors in this comparison: opportunity cost. At a 10% average annual return, that $80,000 has the potential to grow dramatically over the next 2 decades. And that's before counting any additional monthly investments. That doesn't mean Alex is losing out. His money went toward a home that was also appreciating and building equity. But that $80,000 had an alternative use, and an honest comparison has to account for it. Now, let me jump to year 10. Alex is 42. His home, appreciating at between 3% and 4% per year, is now worth somewhere between roughly $470,000 and $518,000. After 10 years of mortgage payments, his remaining loan balance is about $240,000. That leaves Alex with roughly $230,000 to $278,000 in home equity. He now walks around the property with the confidence of a man who owns about half of every brick. Over the decade, he has also spent money maintaining and repairing the place. Some of that improved the house. Some of it simply stopped the property from slowly returning to nature. Dan, meanwhile, has kept investing. At a 10% average annual return, his original $80,000 alone is now worth roughly $207,000. And throughout those 10 years, he has also invested the money he saves each month by renting. That amount started at $653 a month, but gradually gradually became smaller as his rent increased by 3% each year. Add those monthly investments and their growth to his original $80,000, and Dan's portfolio is now worth roughly $290,000. So after 10 years, Dan is still ahead in liquid financial assets. But something important has shifted. His rent is no longer $2,000. After 10 years of 3% annual hikes, it's approaching $2,700 per month. Alex's principal and interest payment is still sitting at about $1,863. Now, let's head to year 20. Alex and Dan are 52. Alex's home, appreciating at between 3% and 4% per year, is now worth somewhere between roughly $632,000 and $767,000. His mortgage balance has fallen to about $160,000. That leaves him with somewhere between roughly $472,000 and $607,000 in home equity. Dan's portfolio has also been compounding for 20 years. His original $80,000 alone is now worth roughly $538,000 at a 10% annual return. And that doesn't include the extra money he invested during the years when renting was cheaper. Add those monthly investments plus the returns they earned, and Dan's total portfolio is now worth roughly $750,000. So, after 20 years on pure net worth, Dan has come out ahead, but their wealth looks very different. Dan's is much easier to access. Alex cannot sell 8% of the kitchen, at least not without causing some serious questions from future buyers. But Dan still has one cost that never disappears: rent. After 20 years of 3% annual increases, his original $2,000 rent is now around $3,600 per month. Alex has only 10 years left on his mortgage. Dan's rent has no finish line, but Dan's result comes with one very critical catch. He actually had to invest the difference. Every month for decades, when the market rises, you invest. When it drops 30%, you invest. When financial headlines announce the end of capitalism for the fourth time that decade, you invest. The spreadsheet assumes perfect discipline. Human beings often have other plans. The money he was supposed to invest becomes a nicer car, a few vacations, a slightly more expensive lifestyle, and 10 years later, the investment portfolio that looked fantastic on paper somehow never made it out of the spreadsheet. A mortgage, on the other hand, creates a form of forced savings. Alex doesn't decide every month whether he feels like building equity. The bank has already made that decision for him, and behaviorally, that matters. But buying has weaknesses of its own. The first is time. If Alex had sold after only 3 years, the closing costs going in, real estate fees coming out, and interest-heavy early mortgage payments could easily have wiped out much of his gain. Buying generally needs time for the numbers to work in your favor. The second issue is mobility. Imagine that several years into their journey, both Alex and Dan receive incredible job offers in another state. Dan's decision is relatively simple. He gives notice, packs up, and leaves. Alex can move too, but he has another decision to make. He can sell the house, which means dealing with selling fees and finding a buyer, or he can rent the house out and relocate. But now he has a mortgage on one property, rent in another city, and a tenant who may or may not cover all his expenses. Any shortfall comes directly out of Alex's pocket, leaving him with less money to save and invest. Then there is concentration risk. Dan owns a diversified portfolio containing thousands of companies. Alex owns one house on one street in one neighborhood in one city. If the area performs brilliantly, Alex benefits. If the local economy struggles, he cannot rebalance his portfolio by selling the upstairs bathroom. And finally, liquidity. If Dan needs $20,000, he can sell part of his portfolio. If Alex needs $20,000, he has to refinance, borrow against his equity, or ultimately sell the prop. Home equity is wealth, but it isn't particularly easy to spend. So, which is better, buying or renting? The honest answer is it depends. Buying becomes more attractive when you plan to stay for a long time. 7 to 10 years or more gives transaction costs time to be absorbed. Principal pay down builds up. A fixed principal and interest payment becomes more valuable as rents rise and appreciation has more time to work. Buying also becomes more attractive when property prices are reasonable relative to rent. One quick tool is the price to rent ratio. Divide the home price by the annual rent of a comparable property. A $350,000 house divided by $24,000 in annual rent gives us a price to rent ratio of about 14.6. As that ratio gets much higher, particularly above 20, renting generally becomes more competitive. But it's only a shortcut. Mortgage rates, taxes, insurance, and expected market returns still matter. Renting becomes more attractive when home prices are high relative to rent, when flexibility has real value, and when the renter actually follows through on investing the difference. And of course, it doesn't have to be either or. Buying a home doesn't mean you have to stop investing, because personal finance is rarely about finding one single perfect strategy. It's about understanding the trade-offs. Alex traded liquidity and mobility for stability, leverage, and long-term control over his living space. Dan traded housing certainty for flexibility, liquidity, and more money invested in financial markets. Neither choice was automatically smart. Neither was automatically foolish. The real decision comes down to two questions. How long are you actually going to stay? Because if you buy a house and leave 3 years later, transaction costs can punish you. And if you rent, will you genuinely invest the difference? Because if you rent for 20 years and spend every extra dollar you save, the investment advantage disappears. So no, rent isn't automatically throwing money away. Renters pay rent, homeowners pay interest, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and transaction fees. Both are paying for shelter, and homeownership can absolutely build enormous wealth. But it's also an expensive, illiquid asset with ongoing upkeep, concentration risk, and a roof that occasionally requests $12,000. The winner isn't always the homeowner, and it isn't always the renter. Alex needed to stay long enough for buying to work. Dan needed to invest consistently enough for renting to work, because 20 years later, the difference between them didn't simply come down to who bought and who rented. It came down to what they did after making that decision. Subscribe to my channel for more videos breaking down the logic behind the financial decisions we make every day. And let me know in the comments, are you buying, renting, or waiting for interest rates and house prices to both come down at the exact same time? In which case, I admire your optimism. See you in the next one.